Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so when you think of the Bahmani and the Adil Shahi sultanates, the powers ruling southern India from the 14th to the 17th centuries, what comes to mind? Probably massive forts, grand mosques, and complex political battles, right? But hidden behind those fortress walls was something much more surprising, an incredibly sophisticated, state-sponsored educational machine. Today, we're going to look at the fascinating evolution of Islamic education in the region, focusing on who these institutions were built for and how they actually functioned day to day.
To do that, we're covering 5 key areas today. Beyond just religion, the sultans as patrons of learning, the educational structure itself, student life and welfare, and finally, a legacy of inclusion. Let's jump right in.
Part 1. Beyond just religion. It's time to challenge the historical narrative. Look, we've got to address the elephant in the room right off the bat. The pervasive myth that these medieval institutions were exclusively just centers for religious instruction. For a really long time, the standard historical narrative leaned heavily into the idea that mosques and madrasas in the medieval Deccan only taught theology. But the actual historical sources, they reveal a completely different, highly diverse curriculum. Rational and secular sciences were taught right alongside religious texts. If you were a student back then, your day wasn't just spent reading scripture. You were diving deep into mantiq, which is logic, falsafa or philosophy, tib, traditional medicine, and riyadi, which translates to mathematics. There was literally no strict boundary between religious and non-religious subjects. They were seen as two sides of the same coin, totally necessary for a well-rounded intellect.
And this comparison perfectly captures the evolution of Islamic education in the region, showing how higher learning was deliberately split to accommodate different career paths for these history students. On the one hand, you had the Madaris stage. This was heavily focused on religious mastery to prepare students for roles like a religious judge or scholar. But then you had the Mulazim stage. This was an advanced level laser-focused on secular and administrative studies. Why? Because the state desperately needed highly capable administrators, like wazir or minister, to keep things running. Students actually had to pass rigorous exams for this track, and the successful graduates got their names recorded in a special, highly coveted state register.
Section 2. Sultans' patrons of learning, and how they funded this knowledge boom.
So why this huge focus on secular subjects? Well, it all comes down to the sultan's influence. The Bahmani and Adil Shahi sultans weren't just building religious monuments for the sake of it, they were actively engineering human resources to run massive empires, and they poured absolutely incredible amounts of money into doing it. This massive shift really kicks off in 1347. That is when Hasan Gangu, Bahman Shah, established the Bahmani Empire. He immediately made the city of Gulbarga his capital and began transforming it into a major intellectual hub, basically by opening his checkbook and inviting top-tier foreign scholars to come and teach.
These recruited foreign scholars were known as the Afaki. We're talking about brilliant minds migrating from Persia, Central Asia, and the Arab world. When they arrived in the Deccan, they brought their immense knowledge of science, administration, and literature with them. They merged their traditions with the local indigenous Deccani culture, creating this vibrant, totally new intellectual environment that essentially put southern India on the global academic map.
And this state patronage eventually reached incredible heights. By the time we get to the Adil Shahi dynasty, this total obsession with education hit its absolute peak. In 1593, the ruler Ibrahim Adil Shah II was so unbelievably proud of the intellectual culture he'd cultivated that he officially renamed his capital city of Bijapur to Vijapur, which literally translates to the city of knowledge.
No joke.
Which brings us to Section 3, the educational structure. Let's trace the path from primary to higher learning.
So the crucial point here is, how exactly did a student navigate this city of knowledge? What did the actual educational structure look like centuries ago? It evolved in these beautifully structured, logical tiers. A student's journey usually started at the mosque for absolute foundational learning and basic Arabic. Then they moved to the maktab, essentially a primary school attached to the mosque focusing on basic literacy, writing, and math. From there, they might engage with the khanka, before ultimately reaching the madrasa, which was essentially the equivalent of a modern-day university for advanced higher education.
I really want to highlight the Khanha tier in that timeline because it's so fascinating. Established by Sufi saints, the Khanqa served as a highly inclusive bridge. It offered spiritual education and basic instruction, sure, but unlike some of the more formal state institutions, it was entirely open to people from all walks of life, regardless of their social standing or even their religion. It was just a massive engine for community integration. Let's move on to Section 4, Student Life and Welfare. Basically, the medieval university experience.
Okay, so what was daily life actually like for these history students navigating these massive educational complexes? Imagine getting a full-ride university scholarship today. Well, that was the actual reality for many in the medieval Deccan. Institutions like the famous Mahmud Gawan Madrasa in Bidar operated on incredible state-funded welfare. The state provided free accommodation and specific student quarters, free textbooks, and even daily meals from a dedicated canteen. By bearing the entire educational expense, these institutions completely leveled the playing field, allowing economically disadvantaged kids to climb the social ladder. Which brings us to a very important and frankly delicious question based directly on the historical records. What exactly did a medieval university student eat on one of these state-sponsored meal plans?
Believe it or not, we actually have the exact menus. According to the Dastur al-Amal, which were the official administrative regulations of the ruler Muhammad Adil Shah, students were eating really well. They were served fresh bread in the morning, a hearty, rich biryani at midday, and comforting khichdi alongside sweets at night. It's just one of those incredible details that brings the history to life, right? It really shows just how much the state invested in keeping their students focused and fueled up.
Section 5. A legacy of inclusion. Looking beyond religious boundaries.
This incredible welfare system we just talked about, the free books, the housing, the biryani, it wasn't just about charity. It was a highly calculated, powerful tool for social mobility and cultural inclusion that went far beyond just the Muslim community. Because secular administrative training in subjects like Persian language and mathematics was freely available, non-Muslims frequently entered this system. The path was crystal clear. Master the secular subjects, pass the rigorous Malazim stage examinations, and you could secure powerful administrative and judicial positions within the government. In this society, education truly was the great equalizer.
And we even see formal state policies actively encouraging this cross-cultural engagement. For instance, look at the Kubshah policy. It explicitly allowed non-Muslims to study Islamic principles and secular sciences within these institutions with the complete freedom to either accept or reject the Islamic religion. They were completely free to pursue an education without any forced conversion. This fostered an incredible environment of mutual cooperation, respect, and coexistence that, frankly, is often entirely left out of the modern historical narrative.
Finally, Section 6, Conclusion, the true multifaceted legacy of the Deccan.
Wrapping up this explainer, I think it's very clear that we need to completely reevaluate our historical assumptions about the medieval Deccan and its approach to knowledge. Far from being isolated religious echo chambers, these medieval institutions, the mosques, the maktabs, the madrasas, and the khanqahs, were highly sophisticated engines. They drove secular learning, they produced the state's top administrators, and they delivered remarkable social welfare that successfully transcended both religious and economic boundaries.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you to chew on. If the Deccan sultans figured out how to brilliantly blend secular science, integrate diverse cultures, and provide state-sponsored welfare, including free biryani, centuries ago, what can our modern educational systems learn from their incredible legacy of inclusion? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I really hope this changes how you view the history of education.